Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, everything will be fine as long as he can stay healthy. Those are some dangerous words to hear when you're talking about the NFL. We'll talk about that. We'll get your calls and texts and a lot more coming up on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for May 31st, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won, and won, and won, and won, and won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. Of course, if you're checking us out on YouTube, that's because of my man Ari. We definitely appreciate him. We appreciate you as well. But if you're checking out Ari, you want to hit him up on Twitter, you can, at Ari Produces. If you want to hit me up on Twitter, you can do that as well, at your boy Q254. You want to get something in on the show, definitely do it that way. Or the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts will come up in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll talk about those words that I mentioned at the top. Everything will be fine as long as he can stay healthy. Here in segment number 1, of course, we got a deep dive into the Jimmy G conversation, as that's been the hot topic ever since Memorial Day weekend. And Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk discovered the contract of Jimmy G, discovered the injury clause of Jimmy G, and everything, all the language that was put into that contract. And, you know, that's been the hot topic. Some people say it's not a big deal. Some people say it is a big deal. I mentioned that I was going to have Mike Florio on my radio show on Tuesday, and I actually got hit up by someone on Twitter that said, hey, man, Jason from overthecap.com has already basically squashed this conversation. This is nothing to talk about. You're beating a dead horse. Yawn. And I said, hey, you know, the thing about it is, I like to hear both sides of the story. It could actually be a nothing conversation, and that would be great, right? I would love to come back when training camp starts, Jimmy G's out there and he's healthy, and I come back and say, you know what? Hey, all that was about nothing. Jimmy G is good to go. He's going to be the starting quarterback in 2023. Nothing to see here. That's what I hope I do. But at the same time, I'm not going to be blind. I'm not going to close my eyes and say, you know what, this is going to be all good. There's no problem. The Raiders say it's fine. 2 thumbs up, right? I mean, we've been there, done that already. The day after Jimmy G was supposed to sign the contract, and then he comes back and signs the contract the next day. Remember, it was supposed to be on a Thursday. It ended up being on a Friday when he signed his contract and met with the media. We were told everything was all good, just dotting the I's, crossing the T's, nothing to see here. And, in fact, that wasn't true. Right? I mean, if we had found out the truth, everyone would have known that he failed his physical, even though there was a lot of conversation and a lot of leaning towards that. Well, what we heard from the organization, all I can do is take them at face value because, well, what else can I do? I can't go in there with blazing guns and say, oh, no, they're lying, because I don't know that, right? And so I like to talk on what I know. So right now what we know is that Jimmy G is not ready to go. Right? He has to pass a physical before he can ever collect any money from the Raiders and before he can ever get on the field for the Raiders. So, of course, best case scenario, he's out there for training camp and everything's good. Nothing to see here, as mentioned. Worst case scenario, never suits up for the silver and black. And I know that that's a wide variety. It's going far left and it's going far right, but it's a possibility when you talk about Jimmy G. So, again, I like to hear both sides of the story. And Michael Lombardi, a longtime GM, player personnel guy in the NFL. He was even with the Raiders organization. His son works for the Raiders organization right now, Mick Lombardi. He is on the GM Shuffle podcast. And basically, he's saying, I've done plenty of these contracts in my career, and there's nothing to see here. Injury causes and little clauses in the contract, those are always there. Like, for the most part, they're always there. But I'll let Michael Lombardi explain it in his words, as he believes there's nothing to see here.
I'm not anyone special, but I spent 35 years in the National Football League. I did a lot of contracts. And I would say in 70% of those contracts that I did, there was an injury waiver of some sort, especially on a veteran player. They signed an injury waiver on the specific injury. Does this mean if he breaks his arm, they could cut him? No. It's only specifically around the second metatarsal. This is very common, okay? I keep repeating this. All right,
Yep.
So now they know that's what they want to do, and now they plan the course of action. Okay, we're going to have the operation done. You're going to be in a boot. You're going to be in the building. Boom, 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 and we move forward. And I think anybody who makes more of that than what it really is doesn't understand the National Football League. Garoppolo is expected to be their quarterback, and unless something catastrophic happens with his foot, he will be the quarterback. And all this conversation that we're having in May on Memorial Day will be looked at as, oh, that was just for clicks.
So there you go. Longtime GM, player personnel guy, Michael Lombardi, basically saying nothing to see here. Now, the one thing that he didn't mention was the fact that, the clause is in a lot of contracts. When it comes to veterans, you look at that, especially when they're coming off of injuries, and you do that. And he's done that in like 70% of the contracts. That's what he mentioned. But not one time, and I know that was only a minute clip, not one time did he mention, and a lot of times we wrote up contracts and we decided to withhold the player's signing bonus. Well, that's what the Raiders did. Jimmy G was supposed to get $11.25 million signing bonus when he put his name on the dotted line that he did not get. That got rolled into his base salary for 2023. So basically, he was expecting to get $11.25 million deposit that day, and he's not going to get that. He's going to get that in game checks now. So who knows what he's going to get? One, obviously the Raiders decided that that's how they were going to protect themselves, but they still went ahead with the deal with Jimmy G. So there's got to be some level of confidence there. And also, there's got to be some level of confidence with Jimmy G because he agreed to the deal. Him and his agent, Don Yee, agreed to the deal. So here's Mike Florio. As promised, he was on my radio show from Pro Football Talk. He led things off on Tuesday, 2:05, right out the gates. Boom, he was on the show. So the first thing I asked him was about the money, the $11.25 million signing bonus, and how much if that was what stood out to him the most about this whole Jimmy G situation. Here's a really lengthy answer from Mike Florio.
So what happened was last week, the story comes out that he had foot surgery. And, when you're following all 32 teams, there's a constant churning that happens. There's a rhythm, there's a cycle, and you keep moving and you keep moving. And when I thought I saw it, it made like some neurons fire in my brain, but not enough. And then I saw some follow-up quotes from Josh McDaniels, head coach of the Raiders, obviously. And at some point, I went back and I looked at the stories, and I remembered there was something weird about his press conference. They sent everybody home the night they were going to do it, and then they did the whole nothing to see here, which really should be the NFL's motto, not football is family, but nothing to see here. Jimmy did it himself the next day when he was asked about it, downplayed everything, acted like it was no big deal. But he didn't have surgery after he injured the foot with the 49ers. Then he signs with the Raiders, and not long after that has foot surgery. I thought maybe there'll be something in the contract that sheds some light on the concern, because I knew that when the Vikings signed Marcus Davenport this year, there's language in his deal that addresses a shoulder injury that had surgery on, and it gives the team protections and exemptions. And this isn't some new term, but I thought maybe it would give us an idea. And that's when I got the contract on Saturday. I didn't time any of this. I didn't plan any of this. It all just happened organically. I read the contract, and it's like, wow, this addendum G that is a lengthy waiver and release of liability, and it's got terms in there that when you read the whole contract together, it makes it clear that the Raiders can pull the plug on this thing if he can't pass a physical later this year as he recovers from this surgery that he had. And I think the thing that makes this far different from the standard usual injury waiver, they took away his signing bonus, and they moved that $11.25 million into base salary in 2023 that he won't get until he can pass the physical. So, he comes to town after they agree to a deal in that 52-hour window where it's go, 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 got to work out these deals, got to figure out who's going to sign where. They do a deal with Jimmy Garoppolo. I would say they assume that he's healthy. He shows up for the physical. They find out he's not, and they got to work this thing out, knowing that any fallback they would have had is already gone. Jarrett Stidham's gone. Other free agent quarterbacks have signed with other teams. So, it really put everybody in a bad spot here, and the Raiders now have to hope that this foot surgery works and he'll be good to go when training camp rolls around.
So there you go. Really good answer right there from Mike Florio. And again, the money is a big deal. Cash in hand is a big deal. We talk about it on contracts all the time, that it's not about the money that is reported, the whatever the deal is. It's always about what's the guaranteed money. So for a player to pass on that guaranteed money and basically have a team hold that guaranteed money and say, you're not getting this anymore, we're going to put it into your base salary, that is a big deal. That's what these players want, especially free agents. They want that guaranteed money. We talk about it all the time. Maybe they could just front load a contract. We talk about it with Josh Jacobs. Maybe they could just front load the contract and be good to go there. Give him a lot of cash up front, and then the years and the salary don't really matter because he's already got the majority of the contract. We talk about that all the time. So why should we ignore it now? And I know a lot of people aren't big Mike Florio fans, and that's fine. But the fact is that he's a lawyer. He's got a lawyer background. He got the contract. It's not like he's just making stuff up, throwing it against the wall, and hoping it sticks. I mean, he's reading the contract. The contract's out there. So that's why he was on the show to talk about it. And so the question that I had, this will be the final soundbite that you hear from Mike Florio, is I basically said, I feel like the Raiders have some level of confidence that Jimmy G is going to be available for the start of training camp, or my mind is that they would have addressed the quarterback position in the draft and they wouldn't have waited till the 4th round. So does that show that the Raiders have a level of confidence in one Jimmy G to be healthy?
Well, it's a month removed from the surgery, so I assume they would have an idea that how the surgery went and whether the rehab is progressing the right way. But then there's just the simple reality of the Raiders possibly not feeling comfortable at any of the prior rounds, any of their prior picks, making the call for a quarterback. That's the thing about the draft. You got all shapes and sizes of players thrown in the same bucket, and you've got to pick one at one position, and you got to have your priorities right. And maybe by the time they were on the clock at number 7, the 3 guys they would have considered were all gone, and they didn't believe in Will Levis, so they pass. And then when they pick again, they pass, and they pass, and they pass until the last pick of round 4, and they take Aiden O'Connell. And, hey, maybe they know something about him the rest of us don't, and maybe they're going to get it right, and maybe they're going to develop this guy into a starter. But the reality is, you know, there's a chance that, however, it's greater than 0%. I don't know what the number is, but it's a greater than 0% chance he's going to be playing sooner rather than later because of this Jimmy G situation. And the other reality, too, is, and I think this is another reason why the Raiders kept it quiet, of all the quarterbacks in the NFL, like, if we just heard about this generically and we were told, guess which quarterback it is, it would have been, we would all guess Jimmy G.
Right.
He's the only quarterback. Jimmy G or Tua, I guess. So those would have been the 2 possible candidates, but I still think the first name that anyone would have said when we're talking about quarterback injury that potentially derails the start of the season, we would have said Jimmy Garoppolo.
So there you go. There's Mike Florio talking about the Raiders' level of confidence, and, you know, potentially they could have gone and got a quarterback, but they didn't. You know, maybe that was just because a guy wasn't available that they were comfortable with. Maybe Aiden O'Connell, as I mentioned on Tuesday's show, really is a guy that they're going to end up coaching up, and he's going to be a franchise quarterback. Or, you know, maybe they have all their eggs in the Jimmy G basket. We'll have to wait and see. I'm interested. Next week is going to be interesting. June 5th, that's Media Day at the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center, Raiders HQ. And what that means is that's when it's basically like picture day for school, right? I mean, remember when you got all dressed up for picture day and you wore your good school clothes and you made sure your hair was cut and you went and got your picture? That's what they're doing. They're doing the Media Day. It's a big to-do in the indoor facility. They're going to walk around. They're going to do a lot of interviews. We'll talk to players. We'll talk to coaches. I'll be there. I'm excited about that opportunity. I'm interested to see if Jimmy G is there and at what capacity he's there. Is he still going to be walking around in a boot? Is he going to be on a scooter? You know, or is he going to be there? Is he not going to be there at all? Right? And then June 6th through 8th is mandatory mini camp. So is he going to be out there? Is he going to be available? Is he going to still be in a boot? You know what I mean? Like, what capacity will Jimmy G be out there? Next week is going to be very interesting. Of course, on Friday is June 1st. That's when everyone's expecting, if there's going to be any movement with Hunter Renfrow, it'll be Friday or after June 1st. So that's also an interesting date to pay attention to. And Josh Jacobs is also a guy that I'll be looking forward to seeing if he's out there, but I would be willing to bet money that as long as he doesn't have his contract signed, that franchise tag signed or a long-term deal signed, he won't be out there next week either. So don't expect to hear from Josh Jacobs, but I'm looking forward to Media Day. Last year, I remember interviewing Trayvon Merrick and a couple other Raiders, and so looking forward to having that opportunity. Of course, anything that we'll get or I get from that, I'll definitely bring back to the show here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So that's going to do it for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Coming up in segment number 2, it's never good to bank your season on a line when you say everything will be fine as long as he stays healthy. That's coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, and we'll get to that after I tell you about the title sponsor, which is FanDuel. And right now is a great time to make a fast break to FanDuel. I know it's the NBA Finals are going to get started on Thursday. We got the Nugget, we got the Heat, we got the Nuggets and the Heat. Of course, Denver has the home court advantage, so it's going to be really a tough out for Miami. Denver's a really good team, but there's a reason why they play the games, and there's a reason why you should make a move to FanDuel. New customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. I had to take a double and a triple check. I had to recheck everything a couple times when they said that $2,500 $2,500 is a lot of money. And you can get that back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to talk about why it's never a good thing when you're talking about, well, everything will be fine as long as he stays healthy. Don't bank your season on a particular player's health. And it's so funny talking about Jimmy G and this foot situation. And look, we've been talking about Jimmy G and his health since it was even rumored that he was going to have interest from the Raiders, right? I mean, way before the legal tampering period opened up, way before they came into agreement on the contract, way before he met with the media. That was one of the biggest things that we talked about is, yeah, Jimmy G's a good quarterback, but he's never healthy. Like, that was our conversation for the longest. And it was funny on my radio show on Tuesday, right in the middle of the conversation, all of a sudden it just hit me, and I was like, man, I've never talked about one particular player and their injury history as much as I've talked about Jimmy G already, and it's not even June yet, right? That's a big concern. That should be like the biggest red flag of all. And I know I've talked about player ability and availability and ability, all that good stuff. I talked about that over the years. Like, there's no doubt. But, man, I'm already worn out talking about Jimmy G and his injuries, and it's not even June. Like, they're not even at training camp yet. So it got me thinking, and I threw the question out there on Raider Nation Radio 920. I was like, when's the last time as a Raider fan base we've talked about one particular player and their health, and everything really depended on their health as much as we've talked about Jimmy G already? You know, and we didn't do that with Carr, right? Because Carr was available like 98% of the time. Right? I mean, he only missed a couple games in his career, right? So, I mean, that was never a concern. Like, you knew for sure you were going to get a guy that was going to be available when it came to Derek Carr. Jimmy G, you don't know that. And then I kept thinking, and I even threw the question, I was like, who, Raider Nation? Like, who is it that we've talked about? And someone brought up Darren McFadden. Actually, multiple people brought up Darren McFadden, and I was like, yeah. That's right. Darren McFadden had the turf toe, and that was always unfortunate because we always talked about, man, what a good player he could have been if it wasn't for that turf toe injury. That was always a big one. So, yeah, Darren McFadden was definitely one. A couple people brought up, Josh Jacobs just because we see him banged up. But I don't look at Josh Jacobs and ever recall saying, well, the Raiders season's going to go as Josh Jacobs goes as long as he stays healthy. I don't really look at it like that. I know he's been banged up a little bit, but not too much when it comes to the running back position. And really the example I had on the radio was, if you want to talk about a running back and you want to talk about health and lack of health, we always talked about that with Christian McCaffrey, right? Christian McCaffrey was the guy. He's like, man, that guy is dynamic, but he just cannot stay healthy. That's who I think about when I think about running backs that can't stay healthy. And it's funny, when I was in Texas and I was at ESPN Central Texas, of course, we were covering the Cowboys. Every single year, it kept coming down to, well, as long as Sean Lee can stay healthy, then the Cowboys defense is going to be fine, and the Cowboys will be great as long as Sean Lee can stay healthy. And then it even went to the other side of the ball. Well, as long as Tyron Smith stays good, then the offensive line will be intact. And every year I used to tell them, why do you still bank on this guy? Why do you count on this guy? Why do you go into the regular season or go into training camp believing as long as he can stay healthy? What has given you the idea that he can stay healthy? And I realized all that preaching that I did to Cowboy fans when I was in Central Texas, I should have been doing it to myself. Like, I know I've brought up injuries and Jimmy G a lot, but at the same time, I'm looking at the season. I'm going through the win-losses. I'm talking about how much better can Devontae Adams make Jimmy G. But at the end of the day, why do I actually believe that this dude's going to be healthy the majority of the time? Like, what makes me think that? And Raider Nation, I'll say the same thing to you. What makes you believe he's going to be healthy the majority of the time when he hasn't done that? He hasn't shown that he could do that consistently in his career. One time has he been healthy all season long. Once. Right? I mean, think about that. Like, why do I believe that he can be healthy? And now it's not even June, and we're talking about an injury from his last team that he didn't have surgery on that we're all hoping. And I'm hoping, I'll tell you that, because he's the best option they have at quarterback. I'm hoping he's ready for training camp. I'm hoping he's going to be out there throwing the ball and getting familiar with Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers and Hunter Renfrow and whoever else is out there. And hopefully Josh Jacobs is out there at that point and, getting familiar with his new offensive line and all that good stuff, getting on the same page with Josh McDaniels. I hope all that happens by training camp, the start of training camp. Like, that's the goal, right? But it's so crazy to think that, coming off of Memorial Day weekend and the discovery that Mike Florio had in the contract situation with Jimmy G, like, Why am I surprised that this is the conversation that we're having? Why? It is so crazy. Think about around the league. Think about some of these teams. Like I said, Sean Lee with the Cowboys is one that stood out to me. Darren McFadden was one that was brought up on my radio show on Tuesday. How about Tua with the Dolphins? How many times that if we just talk about the Dolphins, say, yeah, well, if Tua's healthy? Or a better one, how about Lamar Jackson with Baltimore, right? Even when we all thought that there was a possibility that maybe Lamar could get out of Baltimore, and who knows, maybe the Raiders could sign him to an offer sheet, or maybe another team would sign him to an offer sheet. How many people called in or texted in or tweeted at me and said, yeah, but Q, what about availability? He's not available. He wasn't even available for the playoffs. So Lamar Jackson is starting to fit in that category as well as a guy that, yeah, they'll be good as long as he's available, right? And that's not a good area to be in, and that's not a good situation as a fan base to kind of dip your toes into. Again, it's not even June yet. They haven't even got to mandatory minicamp, and we're already kind of crossing our fingers hoping the best for Jimmy G to stay healthy. So if we're hoping he gets to the starting line, what makes us think that he's going to get to the finish line, right? That's and I promise you, this came up so organically just on the radio talking about the whole situation that occurred over the weekend. And then I don't know at what point I said injury. Maybe I said it for the 25th time on the radio show. I don't know. But all of a sudden it just hit me, and I was like, why have I talked about injuries so much, and it's not even June with this quarterback? I promise you, and like I said, someone had to suggest Darren McFadden, but I don't remember anyone else being that injury prone. Like my man Damon said Darren Waller, but even when Darren Waller got injured in 2021, that was really, Thanksgiving? So that was late November. So, yeah, I mean, he missed games, obviously, in December. Was it December? Yeah, it was 21 because they made the playoffs. He came back at the end of the season. And then 2022, of course, we all know that was, a disaster and he wasn't very healthy. But Hunter Renfrow, he didn't participate in a lot of games last year because he was injured. But that was the first time that we ever really were concerned about the availability of Hunter Renfrow. Right, and I don't think Darren Waller has ever been a guy in the short time that he's been playing consistently for the Raiders that I looked at and was like, oh, that guy's injury prone. Like I never really looked at Darren Waller as that guy. Of course, like I said, he messed up that IT band that I had never even heard of until that Thanksgiving game against the Cowboys, and then that kind of derailed his 2021 season. Then we know 2022 was just a blank show, right? So that was a disaster. But really, man, it is never a good sign when this is the scenario. And so, you go back to Dave Ziegler, you go back to Champ Kelly, you go back to Josh McDaniels and think this is really like the plan that you had in place. And I said it, and multiple people pointed it out to me, Q, when they moved on from Carr, you said they better have the plan, not just a plan. And I stick to that. They better have the plan, but the more and more you start thinking about this situation, you start thinking about the lack of health of Jimmy G, you start thinking about who's behind him, and Brian Hoyer and Aiden O'Connell and Chase Garbers, and you start really questioning, at least I do, is this the plan or is this just a plan or a different version of the plan? Because it feels like this plan maybe have changed like 5 or 6 different times. I don't know if the Tom Brady to the Raiders was plan A. I don't know if this plan has not been rolled out to me. I don't know if Aaron Rodgers was ever involved in part of the plan, but then they thought it was too much capital. The legal tampering period, as Mike Florio pointed out, really kind of messed the Raiders up. Don Yee, the agent for Jimmy Garoppolo, talked to Dave Ziegler. They came into an agreement on a deal. He assured them to a certain extent that Jimmy G would be healthy. They don't get him in the facility until free agency actually opens up. So by the time that they actually get him in the facility and they let their team doctors check him out, they realize, ooh, this is damaged goods. He's not as healthy as we thought. And now you look back and say, okay, well, you already gone too far with Jimmy G. Everyone knows that you came to agreement with Jimmy G. Aaron Rodgers sure is not going to want to feel like option B, right? And who else? Maybe Baker Mayfield would have gone for it, but Baker Mayfield's not familiar with Josh McDaniels. So if you're looking for someone that's familiar with Josh McDaniels and his offense, you're looking at what? Jimmy G, Jacoby Brissett, Brian Hoyer, Cam Newton, right? I mean, none of those. I mean, look, Cam Newton doesn't seem like that's an option. Brian Hoyer is actually with the organization. Maybe Jacoby Brissett would have been okay, but at the same time, like that's nothing that anyone's going to get super excited about. So, I mean, really at that stage of the game, how many options did they have still left on the table? That's why on Tuesday's show, I was like, did they make a mistake? But then I feel like maybe they didn't make a mistake because they still went into the draft and didn't address the quarterback position till the 4th round, right? And look, I'm not a GM. I'm not a personnel guy. I'm a radio dude and a podcaster. So I'll tell you, if it had been me, I probably would have showed my hand and was like, man, I got to go get me a quarterback because this ain't it, right? But obviously they played it cool, calm, and collective. You know, Dave Ziegler told me that having Jimmy G makes them not desperate for a quarterback. So to me, that makes it feel like they're very confident. You know, I was at the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center on Tuesday when me and JT were recording the Raider Roundtable, and I didn't go sit down with Dave Ziegler or Josh McDaniels, so I can't just sit there and say that they reassured me that they were very confident in Jimmy G. But, you know, the mood in the building seemed pretty calm, cool, and collective. Made it seem like they were fine with where they were, and everything will be all good to go come training camp. And look, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. If he's out there for training camp, great. The problem is if all of a sudden you dip into training camp and he misses a day, misses a week and a half, misses 2 weeks. At what point in training camp do you get really concerned and say, okay, now I'm hitting the panic button, right? Because, again, you want to have Jimmy G available week 1 when they head to Denver. You don't want him all of a sudden popping in week 3 or week 4. The way that schedule starts for the Raiders, 3 out of 4 on the road, if you don't have QB1, you're in trouble. And if you're in trouble, 4 games into the season, 5 games into the season, you might as well just say, hey, Aiden O'Connell, let's see what you got, and we'll take our lumps and find out where we're drafted next year. And there's no way in hell I want to talk about the NFL draft in September and October. I don't want to talk about the draft until it's time to talk about the draft, which is late December, early January, if things don't go right. If things go right, you're not talking about the draft until the season's over. So it's very dangerous to say that everything's going to go good as long as somebody is healthy. Banking your season on the health of a particular player never is a good thing. That's what I got for you for segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts are coming up next, 707-654-4693. This is the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with Barry from Baltimore. He's calling to talk about the Jimmy G situation and if he thinks the Raiders made a mistake or not. Here he is, Barry from Baltimore.
What up, Q? This is Barry from Baltimore. I was just calling in about the question regarding, what did the Raiders go wrong or where they went wrong. I know it was also a topic on the radio station. I guess, just going along with the Jimmy G stuff. And I mean, I'm kind of like where I'm at with it right now is personally, I think they probably went wrong with not starting this rebuild or whatever, reload or whatever you would call it last year, where they probably could have got, maybe rid of Carr, but they didn't know, and I get it, so I'm not going to really worry about that. But I don't know. I think a lot of people are freaking about the Jimmy G injury because I think really if the Raiders were that concerned about it, they would have did another path of the draft, meaning they would have went another route. That's what I meant. Maybe trading up or whatever. And who's to say if they could have, but regardless, I think they would have been more aggressive on that route instead of going 4th-round pick on a quarterback. Plus, we don't know in this contract, like, who's to say that Mark Davis, wasn't the one that wanted this clause in there. I mean, he supposedly did the same thing with Roger Saffold, so we don't know that, but it sounds like they're comfortable with it, but, it's just that it seems like, man, any little thing with the Raiders, it just gets, it just gets blown up in the media, and I think a lot of that has to do with them not being that good. I mean, winning, as they say, cures everything. I mean, for example, say the 49ers. They don't really have a starting quarterback right now. I mean, at least one that they know that's healthy or played with them. I mean, Sam Darnold, yeah, okay. Purdy's hurt. We don't know the story of Lance. You don't hear much flack that they get for trading up and getting wins of what they gave up. The reason why is because they win. They've been winning, and that's just how it is, man. So I guess until the Raiders start winning, every little thing that's mentioned by the Raiders is going to blow up. It's going to be on the negative side of it. People are not going to look over it. So I'm just ready for them to start winning, man. So that's basically my thoughts on it, your question. And, I'm going to wait till training camp. He's not, there and not practicing. I'm going to start getting a little nervous. Kind of go from there, but right now I'm just going to kind of go with, just that he's going to be fine, but I wasn't sold on him to begin with. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt now, so they don't have a choice. I'm a Raiders fan, not a player fan, even though I do like some of them. But anyways, man, hey, I appreciate everything you do. Thanks for bringing that content on a daily basis. I'm out. Go Raiders.
Thank you so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And, yeah, I mean, I do think if the Raiders were really worried, and I've alluded to this a few times, that they could have addressed it in the draft. I think they should have addressed it in the draft and would have if they were really, really concerned. We'll see, right? We'll see how it ends up shaking out. Like I said before, man, if training camp comes around and Jimmy G's good to go, this is all for nothing. But I also think it would be silly just to turn your head and say, oh, there's nothing to see here, right? Because clearly there's a little something, something. So if he starts missing training camp, then it's the time that maybe panic kicks in. And that wouldn't even mean like the first day of training camp. But, like a couple weeks into training camp, yeah, I'd definitely be pretty concerned then. But, Barry, thank you so much for that call, my man. I do appreciate you. Next up, got a text from Stabler's Ghost. He said, what's up, Q? Stabler's Ghost from the 413. I'm watching Tuesday's podcast. You and Ari are killing it, by the way. I have a very positive way to look at the quarterback situation. First, McDaniels is really good with quarterbacks. If he worked O'Connell with ones throughout camp, keeping Hoyer holding the clipboard, we have nothing to lose because he can't be worse than Hoyer, and Hoyer is still there to help the rookie along. It wouldn't be that hard for McDaniels to come up with a game plan that protects the kid while slowly opening up the playbook. Why not start him right away if Jimmy can't go? They targeted him. Again, I would almost rather take my chances with him than start Hoyer and admit we're done. It's a silver lining to a worst-case scenario. Keep doing what you do, Q. As always, Raiders as Stabler's Ghost. Basically suggesting if Jimmy can't go ahead and roll with Aiden O'Connell. See what you got. Now, and to Josh McDaniels' credit, he did, start a rookie in Mac Jones, and they did make the playoffs, but Mac Jones was also a first-round pick, not a fourth-round pick. I just think, depending on the fourth-round pick, and Aiden O'Connell, who might turn out to be the end-all, be-all, might end up being a great franchise quarterback when it's all said and done. But depending on him and counting on him as a fourth-round pick to go in and start day one and lead this franchise when you have a Devontae Adams, you have Jacoby Myers, you have Josh Jacobs, you have all these weapons that could potentially make you a really good team. Michael Mayer, the tight end from Notre Dame. You have all these weapons, and then you throw a rookie that you drafted in the fourth round to throw him the rock. I just think that would be almost like suicide. And you don't want to do that. But, again, you might not have an option, and Brian Hoyer might not be better anyway. Might not be that much better. I think, and this is just my personal feeling, if Jimmy G can't go week one, which I can't believe we're talking about that, but we are. If Jimmy G can't go week one, I think Brian Hoyer has to at least start the season. Maybe play 3 or 4 games, then make way for Aiden O'Connell, especially depending on how it goes. If they go 1-3 in those 4 games or 0-4, then I say, all right, it's the Aiden O'Connell time, because if you start 0-4, you're pretty much cooked anyway, right? So that's just kind of how I look at it. But, again, we'll see, and hopefully that, like I said, that is a scenario that never happens. Hopefully Aiden O'Connell never even sees the field in 2023. That would be a best-case scenario. But you also have to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Thank you so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Next up, got a call from 360 Raider. He's calling to talk about the new kickoff rule and why the fact that he thinks it's a lot about nothing. And he explains why. Here he is, 360 Raider.
What's up, Q? 360 Raider. Calling in to give my 2 cents on this new kickoff rule. Thanks for explaining that to me the other day when I called in about whether it was on punts or kickoffs. I do appreciate that. So I want to say, I think all this noise being made about this rule, it's really much ado about nothing. I really don't think this is going to be that big of a deal. If it were on punts, it would be a big deal. But kickoffs, think about it. How often do we see the ball kicked out of the back of the end zone? About 90% of the time. And when a player fields the ball, say at the 5 or 10, he's fielding it because he thinks he can get it a lot further than 25. If not, he's just going to let the ball go into the end zone, or he's going to let it go out of bounds where that team will get it at the 40. I really don't think it's going to make that much of an impact. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. Y'all take care. Do good things.
Thank you so much for the call, my man. And you're right. The majority of the kickoffs, they go in the end zone. And the guys just let it go, and then they have to start at the 25 anyway. I suggest that all the time when the Raiders don't have very good kickoff coverage. Like, hey, just boot it out of the end zone. Just give them the 25-yard line. But that's because I felt like the Raiders kickoff unit wasn't playing really well. Once Carlson started cooking a little bit and kicking that ball and landing it around the 2-yard line, and the coverage unit I thought got better, I think that that's a weapon, right? You know, pin the ball around the 2-3 yard line, force them to return it. Now with this new kickoff rule, you're not forcing anything. They're waving, they're giving up on the play, and they get it at the 25. Like, they're not letting the ball, the majority of the time, they don't let the ball fall in the field of play. They'll let it fall into the end zone. But if they let it fall in the field of play, that's a live ball. So most of the time they're not doing that unless, as you mentioned, it's about to go out of bounds. But in the middle of the field, if the ball's about to bounce, they usually catch that thing or get it on one bounce because, man, that thing, you know, they're not going to just let it bounce at like the 8 and hope it rolls into the end zone. That's what they do on punts. They're not going to do that on the kickoff because the ball's live. Once the ball is live, then, you know, the other team could get it, and it's all bad. It's all bad for the receiving team. So I don't think the rule is about nothing. I think it's about something. It might not affect the game as much as I think it does, but I know for a fact that players and coaches around the league hate it. They absolutely hate it, and the Raiders have a really good special teams unit in Daniel Carlson and A.J. Cole. And I know for a fact that neither one of those guys are fans of the new rule either, and I think that's because it is a really good weapon for the silver and black. Thank you so much for that call, though. I do appreciate you. Just got time for a couple more. How about a text from Luke in the 503? He says, hey, Q, Luke in the 503, I want to know if you think the Raiders should look into Jameis Winston trade with the Saints, possibly Renfro. Do you think that's a good backup starter if Jimmy G can't go, and is it worth the money? Let me know what you think. Raiders. That's Luke in the 503, and look, I wouldn't have any problem with Jameis Winston. The only thing is that he doesn't know Josh McDaniels' system either. So if the goal is to get someone that knows Josh McDaniels' system, then that's not him, right? And so we all know that Jameis has had his moments where he's good. He's had his moments where he's bad. He's had his moments where he's both, right? The year he threw 30-plus touchdowns and 30-plus interceptions, that's awful. We know he's a capable quarterback, but at this stage of the game, what's he really bringing to the table? So if you're going to make a move for someone, I don't think Jameis Winston's the guy. I don't think you make a move for a quarterback at this time. People ask me about Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, Teddy Bridgewater. Why? I don't see any of those guys as an option. You know, I think that you hope that Jimmy G comes back for training camp. That's obviously option A. You roll with Brian Hoyer if he doesn't for a while, and then you pass the sticks on to Aiden O'Connell. I think that's really all you can do and see how it all shakes out, and then you go back to the drawing board in the draft in 2024, and that draft will be in Detroit. It'll be a very interesting draft if the Raiders have a terrible season because, well, Jimmy G wasn't able to get onto the field or at least get onto the field early. Thank you so much for that text. I do appreciate you. We'll close out with my brother, P.E. in North Carolina. He's calling to talk about the Raiders and the fact that GM Dave Ziegler and head coach Josh McDaniels have, in his words, misevaluated the Jimmy G situation and multiple situations since taking over for the Raiders. Here he is, P.E. in North Carolina.
What's going on, Q-Pop? What's up, Raider Nation? P.E. from North Carolina. Look, Q, this is the problem, man. The problem is us, bro. The problem is Raider Nation. We give our heart and our loyalty and our trust, we give it away too easy. Me personally, Q, I'm going to stand on what I said from the beginning. I know a lot of people won't like it, but it's the truth. Dave Ziegler really, in essence, was a one-year GM in New England. So he hasn't proven anything, in my opinion. Josh McDaniels was the head coach in Denver. He didn't succeed there, so he hasn't proven anything. What have these guys done for them to earn our trust and our loyalty? You talk about the Jimmy G situation. Ever since they've been Raiders, they have misevaluated almost every situation. They misevaluated Josh Jacobs. They misevaluated Darren Waller. They paid him too early. They misevaluated the right tackle position. They misevaluated Derek Carr. They gave him a contract and then got rid of him. And now, you know, that they've done all that, I mean, what have they really done besides misevaluate talent? Those are all misses, in my opinion. And not only did they misevaluate Josh Jacobs, Q, they misevaluated him to the point where they spent a 4th-round draft pick and they brought in Brandon Bolden. So they was taking up 2 roster spots for a spot that they misevaluated. So going to Jimmy G, they misevaluated this whole thing, Q. They thought they could get Tom Brady, so they moved on from Derek Carr. All right? Didn't get Brady. Now they don't have Carr. Now they're out of Jimmy G was pretty much the only option that was left. So what are they going to do? Of course they're going to, you know, they have really no choice except for to go sign Jimmy G, even though they know that he had to have the surgery. So I just say this, Raider Nation, man. Don't let people talk to you into something. If you don't like a guy or you don't like a regime, Just stand on it. Just don't like them. Just don't like them just because somebody comes on and says, oh, they're great now. You know, that's not how it's supposed to be. We do it all the time with players. We'll not like a draft pick, and then we'll hear the coach and the GM come out and speak about a draft pick. Then all of a sudden, the next couple of weeks, that draft pick is the greatest thing going. So the problem is not with them. They're only doing what coaches and GMs do. They make moves, and they don't tell you the ulterior motive. They don't tell you what they're really thinking. They just make moves and hope it works out for the best. But we as fans, we can see what's going on. And they clearly misevaluated this whole Jimmy G quarterback situation. So hopefully they'll fix it, but I'm not going with it, man, not until they do it. Peace.
Great call, my man. It's always good to hear from you, and I think that's a really good way of putting it, misevaluated. And look, when it comes to GM Dave Ziegler, he's never been a GM until he got the job with the Raiders. Now, he was in the personnel department in New England. He was in the personnel department in Denver, but he's never been the actual GM. He's never been the guy actually calling the shots. Mark Davis mentioned that while he was at the owners' meetings in Phoenix, and a lot of people talked about him. He said, hey, I think Dave is a bright young GM. He's still got a lot to learn. I don't think that everyone in his circle is telling him everything. And what he meant by that, I know everyone's kind of took that quote as like it meant something terrible. What he was saying is Dave Ziegler's got a lot of friends around the NFL. He's got a lot of GM buddies around the NFL, but they're not all showing their hand because they're not all kind of giving them the answers to the test either. So that's what basically Mark Davis was saying, is that everyone's not telling him how difficult this job is, and he's learning on the fly. So there's going to be misevaluations. Right? There's going to be a lot of situations that don't play out. Now, I'll say, with the Josh Jacobs situation, not giving him his fifth-year option, I think that made him play 17 games. I think that helped him lead the league in rushing. Right? I mean, you could look at it both ways. If they gave him that fifth-year option, would Jacobs have been the leading rusher in the league? Would he have played all 17 games? I think that's the very valid question. And honestly, if they had given him that fifth-year option, I don't think he would have. I really don't. I think he would have taken a game or two where he just didn't play. Right, and I think that it would have been more of a running back by committee instead of Josh Jacobs basically saying, I'm not coming off the field. And I do expect him to play for the Raiders this year, but I do expect it to be more of a running back by committee. I don't expect to see him get 400 touches like he did in 2023 or 2022, excuse me. In other situations, the Carr situation, you could look at it like that. The Darren Waller situation, Renfro, as far as all these contract extensions. I mean, look, you could look at it multiple different ways. I totally understand where you're coming from. I also could see it from the point of view of the Raiders thought that they had enough weapons, at least offensively, that they can outscore everybody and win a bunch of games, and they went for it. And Darren Waller wasn't healthy. Hunter Renfro wasn't healthy. Derek Carr did well, but not as well as they wanted him to do. So they decided that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze as far as the money that was coming up. That's just another way of looking at the other side of things. Again, your breakdown is a really good one, and I definitely believe that. Everyone, well, not everyone, but the majority of Raider Nation probably feels that exact same way, and I don't blame them. I think that's really good. Josh McDaniels as a head coach, spot on. He's got to prove it. I've said it multiple times. He's got to prove that he knows what he's doing as a head coach and not just an offensive coordinator. So, I mean, it kind of is what it is at this point. And honestly, where I stand at the end of the day, and this is a great way to close out the show, I don't care who's in charge. I don't care who the GM is. I don't care who the head coach is. I don't care who the defensive coordinator is. I hope these guys succeed, not because, well, they're cool with me and they give me decent sound bites and I get good. I don't care about any of that. I just hope they succeed so we're not talking about the Raiders pressing the reset button again, right? And some will say that we're talking about that anyway, and maybe we are. But if all of a sudden these guys get fired and someone else comes in, then guess what? It's starting all over again. That's what I want to avoid. I'm hoping that these guys figure it out, get going in the right direction, and they don't have to press reset again and start all over again and have a new system again and bring in the new systems guys again. I don't want to keep repeating that. That's what I care about the most. I don't care if you coach the offense and I coach the defense. You know what I mean? As long as they find a way to win. And hell, T3 Raider Facts can be the GM. As long as it gets done, it wouldn't make me any difference. Really, I'm serious. It's just been way too long that this team has not won. And like you said, that loyalty has gone so far with Raider Nation, and it has yet to be rewarded. And that's what's the most disappointing of the whole thing. So, PE, great to hear from you, brother, man. You got to call in more often. I definitely love hearing from you. And, of course, I love hearing from everyone on the Locked On Raiders podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. More of your calls and texts will come up on tomorrow's show. We'll obviously have more conversation and more news and notes of the day, as we always do. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.